So I know I sent you a really long list. We obviously do not have to go through all those questions.
Mhm.
But I kind of, I'm gonna just make sure that I'm keeping watch of time because I want to make sure that you have to get to whatever meeting you have to get to after this.
Sure.
First question, I'm wondering if you could answer. When you began working at MassArt, what are some of the goals you had set for your presidency, and how do you believe they have manifested themselves during your time?
So when I started, and this goes back, Zayra, to when I was elected by the Board of Higher Education. So this would have been January 2016.
Mhm.
One of the board members at the Board of Higher Ed asked me a question that, if you come here, what do you think you'll set out to do? Which was a great question to ask at the beginning, but you have this disadvantage. You don't really know much at that point. You know a small amount about the institution, but I answered her with 3 points of emphasis that I ended up carrying on the whole time,
Yeah.
because once I said it, I thought that really works. So the answer was given around the idea of identity,
Mhm.
sustainability, and visibility.
Mhm.
And by that, I meant that the institution has a rich legacy and a current, like a contemporary practice of providing an excellent education with a very clear public mission. And that those were things that need to be held tightly to and
Mhm.
then enriched in whatever ways possible.
Yeah.
By sustainability, I didn't mean simply like environmental sustainability, but the long-term sustainability of the institution. There had been a budget deficit when I arrived. Enrollment had dropped off for a few years, and just making sure the institution was sustainable financially and organizationally so that students could receive the best education possible. And then on visibility, it was simply that not enough people know about the institution,
Mm.
and that the first two, preserving its identity and ensuring its sustainability, could be fostered by a heightened visibility for the school in
Mhm.
the city of Boston, in the Commonwealth, throughout the nation, and around the world. That was the way I talked about it.
Yeah.
And as it happened, those were things we have focused on the entire time.
Mhm.
So that is just restating and clinging to the identity of the institution, um, securing a better budget situation and more funding for the institution, and then helping to increase the visibility of the college in the city, in the Commonwealth, and beyond. And I think there's some good examples of that, like the recent CERDNA grant that came is
Mhm.
a good example of accomplishment there.
Yeah.
Some Lumina funding that's coming, the opening of MAM. Those sorts of things are examples of, I think, how we have done that better. And I think also of telling the story of the college better. So I think of that campaign that admissions, enrollment management, and marketing did around what can you do with the MassArt education,
Yeah.
that just tells the story of alums and current students, was a really good way of doing the 3 things I just talked about in a little glimpse, a little window into the institution.
Absolutely. I mean, just from my freshman year to now, I feel like we have never been more solid, and I feel like even with just the opening of MAM, I don't think like we've never been more seen. So
Yeah,
definitely like I think that is so important, in a presidency to really just like kind of stick to those like core things to really work, and make the goals like they're broad, but like, like they're strong. So
yeah, yeah.
um, thank you so much, David, for sharing. All right, so on to the next question. Well, so for me, I think it's, yeah, I mean, a lot of the work that I've done with the JET office, just in case anybody's watching and doesn't know, the Justice, Equity, and Transformation Office, we're like all thinking about what equity means. for MassArt and what does an equitable institution look like. Could you kind of talk a little bit more, like what does it mean to be a just and equitable institution, and how do you believe MassArt embodies that?
So the language that we adopted somewhere in the midst of our work in equity, and I can't exactly tell you when,
Hmm.
it was probably a couple of years into my tenure when Lisa Paloi and others and I started using the language of systemic equity,
Yeah.
it kind of addressing the negative of systemic racism
Hmm.
and discrimination and saying, let's turn that on its head and begin moving toward a goal of systemic equity, which of course begins by admitting there's a systemic problem
Yeah.
and we're looking for a systemic solution to
Hmm.
that. So I think that an institution that is equitable has to acknowledge inequity,
Yeah.
first of all, and not to talk about it in the general terms of society, which we have to do,
Hmm.
but to also talk about our institutional issues and own those institutional issues.
Yeah.
So systemic equity that then gets at the institutional issues and then with it down to the personal and interpersonal problems that are there.
Yeah.
And I think the use of systemic equity helped us to do that at the level of who MassArt is, what kind of college we are, what our community is, and then look at that set in the context of a commonwealth
Mhm.
and a nation
Yeah.
and a world where inequities exist rampantly as they have throughout humanity.
Mhm.
Um, so I think an equitable institution acknowledges those things, charts a course for how that would look different,
Mhm.
and then is willing to consistently interrogate itself
Mm.
about inequities. And I think that may be a place that it's the hardest work to do
Mhm.
next to the acknowledgement, because I think the acknowledgement piece of it, institutionally and personally, is very difficult for all of us.
Yeah.
And but we have to do it.
Mhm.
But I also think that this, after acknowledgement, the willingness to not just say, well, we did that and we're good, the willingness to month after month, year after year, to interrogate yourself and say, we stated some values and we
Mhm.
have some ideals out there that we know we never really reach, but we're working toward them.
Yeah.
Because when will we ever completely have systemic equity? It will always be a goal,
Yeah.
but we will never move closer to that if we aren't willing to keep asking ourselves the hard questions.
Absolutely. And do you think that kind of played into the strategic planning and kind of where it, like right now we're at the point where, things are coming out of it like physically,
Mhm.
and systemically. So can you talk a little bit more about that equity and the strategic planning?
Sure. It was set. It was part of the original thought about the strategic plan because it was a question raised in our community in really difficult circumstances. I mean, from the moment before I even got to the college, this was a question. In fact, I think I visited 5 times in the spring of
Hmm.
2016, and 3 of those times were built around sitting with students to talk
Yeah.
about these issues. So it was clear to me and to others at the college that this had to be a part of our strategic plan. And I think of maybe 3 ways that work has surfaced in very tangible ways. First is the creation of the JET office,
Yep.
that we reconsidered how to do this work and to not simply make it about compliance where you have to follow these rules, but to make it about the culture of the institution that we want to be our best selves. Compliance is good,
Hmm.
but it only gets you so far.
Yeah.
And so I think that the formation of the JET office with Lisa's leadership was really important. I think the JEDI task force, and I still love that they own JEDI, Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. That's gotten a lot of notice outside the campus in a positive way. That group was so thoughtful, and they gave us a lens through which not only to complete the plan,
Hmm.
but to continue to do our work.
Yeah.
And I think there've been some very tangible ways in which that's been implemented. There's more work to do, but some tangible improvements. And then I think another thing that most people may not know about, Zayra, you may not even know about it, is, you know, colleges tend to do risk assessments on an annual basis.
Mm-hmm.
You have this set of questions you ask, and they're largely around things like finances and
Mm-hmm.
debt and all of that kind of stuff, where you prepare for worst case scenarios, but then you take steps to avoid any of those things becoming too risky. And the cabinet, so I and the vice president and some other campus leaders earlier this year, we were talking about how we were implementing the strategic plan. And it occurred to me that our risk assessment should have an equity component,
Mm-hmm.
and to ask, what is the risk if we don't fulfill our equity agenda?
Yeah.
And I don't know that very many institutions would even be in the place to ask that question, much less. And of course, Bob Perry, who manages that, said, we're going to get to work on fitting that into our risk assessment.
Mm-hmm.
I told the board of trustees we were doing that, and they thought that was absolutely something we should do, which I think is another success of the strategic plan, that from students, faculty, staff, all the way through board of trustees and a foundation board, and of course now the state, there's this acknowledgement that this kind of equity agenda isn't a nice thing,
Mm-hmm.
it's a must thing, that
Yeah.
we must do it. So I think all of those are things that came out of the planning
Mm-hmm.
process in quite rich ways.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. You know, like equity is so important because it doesn't just affect us like mentally, it affects the well-beings of our students, and how they come into campus and whether they feel safe to make the work that they're making. So that's really important. Like not a lot of people see that. They see it as a theory, you know, and never a thing that's
Right.
that you need to practice, and that it's actually tangible. So thank you, for speaking on that. I kind of want to talk a little like kind of about some moments of your presidency.
Mhm.
And I'll kind of start off with like the harder question is, what were some of the challenging moments you faced as presidents? And if you had the chance to redo them, would you take it? And what would you have done differently?
So I think early on, the big challenge was around equity issues, actually. It was in part theory,
Mm-hmm.
which is we knew we needed to address these issues because every institution in the United States and the United States itself has to consider these things if we're going to be our best. And there's a general, I don't know if unwillingness is the right word, and it's not, but it's stronger than hesitation, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's this real struggle to grapple with these issues because they're so difficult. Um, but I was confronted with it before I even started full time. So I was walking in knowing I had to deal with it. Would I take it on? Of course I would, because it's the right thing to do. Would I have done it differently? Oh, there are many places where I could have done things better. I
Mm-hmm.
could have responded more quickly. I could have responded more generously. I wish I knew in 2016 some of the questions I now know to ask.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I didn't know them then. And
Yeah.
as a community, we got there, but
Mm-hmm.
I might have made it less difficult in some ways if I had known more at the time. But
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely would have taken it on again, because it's the right thing to do. And it was a way of actually accomplishing what I was talking about institutional identity,
Mm-hmm.
because there's where as an institution we had to make some acknowledgments about our identity. We have lots of good things to talk about, but then there's some parts of our past that aren't good at all on the equity side of things, and we had to acknowledge it. So I also wish, just, we've acknowledged all the way along how difficult it was to talk about these issues, partly because we didn't have the shared vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I would have done differently, because I learned a lot from some students in the first and second year about how to talk about these things. I
Mm-hmm.
wish we could have accelerated that, because then I think we could have had some forums just on that
Yeah.
to help us find a common way, a shared understanding of things,
Mm-hmm.
which would have helped us to maybe have less difficulty in working through some very difficult things.
Absolutely. Thank you, David, for sharing that. So Can you share a moment that made you feel proud to be a part of this community?
Um, sure. Um,
I know
there are
that's
a
a long
number of these.
list.
Yeah. So in general, I made the comment often. I probably said it's probably been in the press that at MassArt there's creativity around every corner.
Mhm.
And there are just so many of those where you walk around the corner and there's a new work or a work in progress, and you get to see it progress over time. I'm just because I'm proud of students, and so to get to see the work live and in process is amazing. You know, I taught every fall, and to see the remarkable intelligence, empathy, curiosity of students in a philosophy course. There are lots of proud moments there about watching students deal with really big issues and deal with them in such remarkable ways. Um, so kind of at an institutional level, I think the opening of MAM and everything that took us to get there, the raising of the money, the devising of plans, the implementation of the opening, and that's everything from Lisa Tung and her staff to student workers who helped make that happen to the entire community kind of getting behind that and the South Hall renovation.
Yeah.
I was very proud of that because that was a big challenge. It happened much sooner than we would have expected,
Mhm.
and it did get a lot of notice for the institution that was just fabulous,
Yeah.
and I'm very proud of that. The other though, and I'm saying this not because you're the one asking, but you know the mass art day that we did
Yeah.
with on equity
Yes.
is one of my proudest moments, and in part because I feel like people like Lisa and Beth and Maureen, a whole host of leaders,
Mhm.
Kim Pender, helped to lead us to that moment.
Yeah.
And it enabled us to say some things that needed to be said. It was the acknowledgement I made was liberating, I think, and I was proud of our community that a president could stand and say those things in a
Mhm.
community like that.
Yeah.
But the proudest I was of that was what you students did in
Mhm.
that and the leadership that you directed. And honestly, in my life, Zayra, the day of wearing your work and standing with you in that is one of my proudest moments in a higher education career, just to be honest.
You make me cry a little.
Yeah. Well, me too. Yeah. I'll never, ever forget that.
Thank you so much, David, for that. That was such a to kind of just explain to people quickly kind of what happened, just in case they weren't there. On Mass Art Day, the JET office, like at the beginnings of the JET office, we were talking about, equity in so many different parts, whether it's through our curriculum or in our critiques. And I made up a work of art that was sort of about the burdens of what it means to be an undocumented student in a college system. And I kindly asked David to wear it while we were talking about, what our places of privileges are. And I think that was, you know, both David and I and everybody that kind of was presenting, we've got very emotional because I think, we do so much acknowledging in our lives of whether it's our places of privilege, whether white or we're, able to be in a college or things like that, but never do you kind of feel the weight of it. And I don't know, for me, like I think just in that moment was I think I never connected with somebody so quickly and so deeply, so I thought that was I think about it often. It was a really big turning point for me, and so thank you for
Oh,
doing that. And
thank,
I'm
thank
honestly
you.
highlight of my college career for sure. um well, thank you, David. So I have a kind of a little surprise. It's not that much of a surprise. I want to do like a quick speed round of questions that's a little bit
Mhm.
more fun and light.
Okay.
And then I'll have one last question for you at the end of that.
Okay.
So I'll give you a very quick to response. What about mass art surprised you?
What about mass art surprised me? So I didn't understand. I knew that it was all colleges or communities, right?
Yeah.
But MassArt is a community of artists and designers. And so there is a kind of interplay among everyone. You know, we're in the strategic plan, we talked about all being learners and all being teachers,
Mm-hmm.
but that's lived out every day on the campus.
That's
So I knew that because I'm a musician, so I know that thing,
mm-hmm.
but the richness of it on the campus caught me off guard. Yeah. So that
Absolutely.
was a really good surprise.
That's awesome. All right. And so last year's primer, we asked if you were 5 inches tall, where would you live on campus?
Were I 5 inches tall, where would I live? Boy, that's an interesting question. And so I'm going to give two answers. There's a
Okay.
pre-mam and
You're the
post.
president. You can do whatever you want.
Yeah. So this is going to sound really funny, but in the DMC, there's that big white wall,
Mm-hmm.
and the space under it, even a student when I got there had some work that was down on the side and the bottom of that. And I
Mm-hmm.
think if I were 5 inches tall, I could live there and get to see everyone coming and going and all the interesting stuff that pops up in the DMC.
All
So I
right.
think, and I'd also be able to overhear conversations of
Mm-hmm.
people
The
sitting
DMC
around.
is a good little sneaky place to catch it all.
But then the other is were I 5 inches tall, I think I would somehow get into MAM and live under the stairs, kind of like a Harry Potter thing.
Yes.
Um, for the same reason, to get to see people seeing the joy of the museum, I think that would be pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Those are both wonderful places. All right. Third question. Is there a class you wish you could have taken?
Two classes. I mean, there are tons, but one, my wife and I kept trying to do a paper making.
Oh, yeah.
We could never work because we love to write notes, and
Hmm.
we wanted to do that, and the timing just never worked out.
Yeah.
So I really regret that we didn't get to do that.
Cool.
Maybe one day. I had really wanted. In fact, one day I got into the glass shop with
Mhm.
students and tried my hand at it. I was terrible at it. But glass making and ceramics,
Yeah.
I wish I could have just taken a night class in one of those, because my artistry is around music and hearing and performing.
Mm-hmm.
I've never really done anything. It's funny, as a conductor, I work with my hands.
Yeah.
My hands are my instrument, but that's tactile in a different way. And I wanted to try that out, and I didn't get to do it. So one day I hope to do it.
Well, you're always welcome back,
Yeah.
David. Okay. Fourth, if you could embody one major, what would it be?
Embody one major, like
Like,
uh,
let's say, I mean, I'm like, I embody art history, like, whatever. That's what I think. But like, what would you be?
yeah, I think in the MassArt curriculum, it would be architecture.
Ah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
You dress the part.
I think that's probably where I would fit. I would be the architect who,
Hmm.
again, wishes I could sculpt and make and all of that. But I think I think that's where I would fit. Yeah.
That's awesome. All right. And now, I mean, I'm sure you've heard it all. There's been many theories about what the P for David P. Nelson stands for. We've heard president. We heard powerhouse. So tell us one last time, what does the P stand for?
Yeah, the P, I appreciate all the speculation about this, but the P is the result of my very Roman Catholic mother giving me the name Paul. So David Paul. So David for the figure in the Hebrew scriptures, and Paul for the apostle in the New Testament. So that's what it is, David Paul. And it's funny, when I was leaving high school and went off to college, I was the first person in my family to go to college.
Mm-hmm.
It was this new world for me, and I didn't know what to do with it. And I wanted to kind of restart my life. So I was going to become D. Paul Nelson. And
Oh,
I was going to use my middle name because I liked it better than David. And I got to college, and I think it lasted about a week because there were so many people that knew me from my high school and other music competitions, and everyone called me David. So it just became,
okay.
so I gave up on it. So Yeah, it's David Paul Nelson. That's right.
Well, thank you, David, for that. Now everybody knows. There's no more
That's right.
speculation about it.
That's right.
um,
Mystery solved.
Mystery is solved, and at a perfect timing. So I have just one last question, and then we can, wrap it up. But, you know, what is it that you hope your legacy to be?
That's a really big question.
I know.
So in some sense, I hope the legacy is written on the wall of the DMC.
Mm,
You know, that we put up there after we all worked through the strategic plan and we settled on the restatement of our identity that Massachusetts College of Art and Design is a public, independent institution that prepares artists, designers, and educators from diverse backgrounds to shape communities, economies, and cultures for the common good. We put that up there along with our values about pursuing a just, compassionate, and equitable learning environment, about cultivating rigorous creative practices by observing, questioning, making, and remaking, honoring courage, honesty, mutual respect, self-expression, and believing in the power of art and design to transform our world. We settled all of that, and Ellen Carr, who does marketing and communications, said we should put that on the wall. And I said, we should own it. And everyone who walks in the door should see who we are and what we value and what we aspire to be. And we'll never live that perfectly,
mm-hmm.
but I hope we'll always aspire to that. And if that can be what's remembered about my time there, I would be very glad. But I would add to it that I hope that we enact that mission and live out those values with real kindness and compassion and care toward one another. I know you and others have heard among the things I learned from my father is he one day told me that I would never lose anything of value by being kind to people.
Mm-hmm.
And I really do hope that our community is kinder and more caring and compassionate, because I and others work together to talk about what the institution will look like in the years to come. So I'd be really happy if those were things that I was remembered for.
Yeah. Thank you, David, for taking the time to do this with me. I just want to say, your presidency, is coming to an end, but I think that you did leave, a lasting legacy at MassArt. And I feel so fortunate that I got to be a student at MassArt from start to finish with you. You've really made an impact in so many of our lives, and I've always admired the fact that you were always kind and you were always engaging with students. It was never this like, I am the president, I'm up here and you're down here. It was always like, this is one community and I live to serve you. So thank you for everything that you have done and continue to do, because I know it's not over yet. And I wish you and Kim all the best with your future and these new possibilities that will come. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And thanks for taking the time to invite me to talk. And thank you for the work that you're doing on behalf of our students.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, David, I hope you have a wonderful day. Please stay safe and healthy. And
Thanks.
we will talk soon. I will send you a recording.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.